All right, I think we can get started. It's just about 7. Um, so yeah, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Current Conversations. We are very excited to have this Q&A session tonight with Haldane Superintendent, Dr. Phil Benante. Thank you for making the time. I know everyone at Haldane must have been nonstop since March. So
it's been pretty busy.
Yeah, we appreciate
happy to be
you
here.
taking the time. Yeah, for sure. So tonight is all about school reopening, the many details that go with it. And I know everyone has a ton of questions, so we're gonna try to get through as many as we can in the time we have. You can submit your questions along the way using the Q&A button that you'll find on your screen, and everyone's screen is different, so you can look out for that Q&A button and just send along your questions. And on that note, I'm gonna pass it on to our editor, Chip Rose, so we can get started and get going with these questions.
Thank you, Teresa. Dr. Benante, thank you so much for taking the time. I know we are probably going to be on here for about 6 hours.
You said 45 minutes.
That was just to get you here. And now a lot of questions. I thought I'd just start by kind of giving a summary if maybe people aren't familiar. So the state said to each district, you've got to send in 3 plans: the hybrid, the all virtual, and the all in person. And I would suspect that most districts, Beacon, Haldane, and Garrison especially, which is what we cover, are looking at the hybrid because I noticed like a lot of the in-person, they'll split by the alphabet with the kids, but it's almost like you got to split it by the parents who are uncomfortable sending their child and the parents who are still uncomfortable, but less discomfort and, sending him in. So I guess, so now you have heard from the state today and you sent out a questionnaire to get an idea of the census of the parents who would be comfortable in either situation. And now can finally kind of go forward without these grand schemes and kind of look at it more practically. So I guess a lot of the questions I expect from parents that I've already heard is practical. What are we going to do practically? So I guess I would want to know, since school starts, as you know, 3 weeks from Thursday, what is that day going to look like at Haldane practically? I mean, what's going to happen?
Well, it's going to look very different, and we're trying to be deliberate with the start of our school year, Chip. Because of that, there's going to be a lot of new procedures and new routines. Health and safety obviously has become what's most important, and it will remain what's most important, certainly through the introduction of the school year. We don't envision a heavy emphasis on academics to start. We see this as there's going to be a transitional period where we have to acclimate our students and our staff to a variety of new routines and procedures in order to keep them safe. So if I could go back, you mentioned the 3 plans that we had to submit to the state, and I think most districts entered into that task with the thought that we were going to have to implement one of those 3 plans. And what's been clarified over the last month is that nope, you're in fact going to be responsible for implementing all 3 of those plans in some way, shape, or form. And I say that for Haldane as an example, where we had, because of our low class size, and that's unique, we have some of the lowest class sizes in the region, we were able to bring back our K through 8 students and still maintain social distancing requirements in our classroom setting. So some people look at those plans and they compare, and they say, don't compare, because every school district's in a different starting point. I'd imagine when you talk to Dr. Landau at Beacon, he's going to talk about some of the unique constraints that they had in creating their plan. We had unique constraints as well. But because of our low class sizes, and then some of our spaces are relatively bigger, we're able to bring more students back at the K-8 level. But at the 9-12 level, we can't do that because we don't have the space like we have in our elementary and middle school, and we have larger class sizes at our high school. That's pretty common. So we're bringing those kids back on a rotational basis. But what's been clarified, and the biggest perhaps change, is that the state has made clear, and Governor Cuomo has made clear, that if a parent or a family is uncomfortable sending their child to school, you also have to be prepared to implement a plan for those families. And that's as part of our survey that's out now, is asking families to designate that and or stipulate that if that's going to be their wishes. So we will have to provide an all remote option for those families as well. So schools have been asked to do a lot. I think superintendents around the region and school boards and school administrators have been hard at work at this, obviously, through the summer. And we're getting ready for the start of the school year, as you mentioned. So as far as practical changes, we anticipate we're going to have more parents dropping our kids off to school as opposed to taking the bus. We obviously want to stagger arrival, so we don't have as many students coming into the building as we normally would, where you usually see this mass entrance and mass exodus at the end of the school day. We have to be much more deliberate with that. The classroom setups are going to look different. Kids are going to be, again, 6 feet apart. Students are going to be masked. Teachers are going to be masked. So I think there were 89 different assurances we had to provide to the state as part of our plan. And each of those assurances speaks to a process or a routine or a procedure that needs to be reevaluated, relearned on the part of our school community. And those are going to be changes. So cafeteria is going to be different. The nature of how kids flow throughout the school campus each day is going to look different. We're keeping kids more centered in classroom spaces as opposed to moving around classrooms each day. So it's going to be a very different start to the year, and it's going to be a very different school year. And I think we'll probably be talking about that a little bit tonight.
Yeah. So how do you manage that? Because you have to be teaching, doing what we did in the spring, which was very frustrating, as you, I'm sure, heard from many parents, kind of this emergency virtual learning.
Right.
And also the in-class. And so the teachers have to pivot a little bit. And are you going to have, separate teachers some teachers doing the virtual and some doing the in-class, or do they combine it? Do you have a live stream? What's the plan there?
So that's what we're actually still trying to sort that out. We're not big enough as a school district to designate teachers just to handle the students who are working remotely. Some of my colleagues in larger districts can do that because, again, they may have 5 or 6 first grade teachers. Well, they can designate one of those first grade teachers to handle the students remotely, 2 or 3 teachers at each grade level, which means we look to alternative means to facilitate or alternative structures to facilitate instruction for our kids. So there's a couple options we have. We can do something of a stream, as you mentioned, where we essentially are allowing kids to look into the classroom from a device of some sort. We could contract out with an entity that, a virtual school of sorts that families could sign into, and we could facilitate learning that way. We don't want to, I would say that's not our preference because, at Haldane, we're a small school community and we really pride ourselves on the relationship between our staff and our families. So that's something we feel there would be a loss there, but it very well may be necessary because we can't put our teachers in a position where they have to navigate essentially 2 separate classrooms at the same time. So that's why the survey is really important. And any families that are listening now, I would say, please make sure you let us know what your intentions are for next year, because I think the solution will be dictated by how many families are choosing that option. If it's only 5%, as compared to 50%, the strategy we choose to take will look very different. So that's why we're giving families, we know it's ambitious, but a week to get back to us so we can get an idea of what scale are we actually talking about right here. There were surveys back last month. You may have seen some of these in the region, just trying to get a general sense of that. But we really need to know from our families specifically what their intentions are now, so we can provide a specific level of detail in what our planning is.
Now, this was a common question to me, both people emailing me and I'm sure coming in, can people switch back and forth? So you start with virtual, it doesn't work for you. Now you want to do in person or vice versa. Are you going to have some flexibility there, or is that going to be too difficult to not commit?
Right, I don't mean to cut you off. In thinking through it, and again, a lot has to come together now in the next 2 weeks. We feel that if a family is making a commitment or indicating that they want to opt out of in-person instruction at Haldane, then depending on what structure we have in place for them, then that has to be defined for a period of time. And we feel initially that's at least a quarter or a trimester. Obviously, we're on trimesters for the elementary kids. And that's because we're going to have to put time and resources into whatever that alternative plan is. And we're not in a position where we can accommodate families going back and forth. We're primarily operating from a health and safety perspective. And we believe that our families, the families I've spoken with who are indicating that they're going to opt their children out, are taking a position of health and safety. They just don't feel that it's safe to have their, for whatever reason, and the reasons really range, to have their child back in school. So I think this is something, a compact, if you will, that we can have with our families, that if they're opting out of sending their child to school and asking us for to accommodate their children outside of school, that's a commitment we're asking them to make for at least the first 10 weeks of the school year. And that will allow us, again, our teachers who are working with kids on Haldane's campus to focus on those students and those new routines and those new procedures. And then again, however we're working with our families who are working remotely or exclusively online, establishing those routines and procedures. But there will be opportunities throughout the school year, again, to re-examine or reevaluate what's going on and have your child come back. I do think, conversely, if a family is sending their child to school, and let's say we get 4 weeks into the school year and now they're taking a position, I'm just not comfortable. Maybe there was something that occurred at home, whatever, maybe it was something that occurred in the school. I hope not, but it certainly could come up. And I want to opt out now to online instruction. I see that as a change we can more readily make. And quite frankly, if a family's not comfortable being in the physical school building, then again, I feel like we would then have a responsibility to accommodate them by setting up whatever that alternative means of instruction is. So these are good questions, and these are the questions that our administrative team's grappling with right now. So we could again articulate what that plan is to families and work with our teachers to create whatever structure is to support families who are now opting for the remote option.
Well, you mentioned the health and safety, and I imagine the mask wearing will be mandatory. It's not an optional thing. A kid cannot wear a mask or wear a mask. It's got to be over their nose. It's got all that kind of thing. The teacher would be on that. I imagine with the younger kids might be more of a challenge than a high schooler. But it's when you talk about health and safety, those protocols will be in place. It's not an option where you can show up without a mask or.
Correct. You have to have a mask as you're coming into school. The Department of Health, and this was an area we got some good feedback over the last 2 weeks since our plan has been released, or a week and a half or so, on the mask wearing language we had in our reopening plan. Because initially, the Department of Health guideline establishes that wherever students are not 6 feet apart, they need to be wearing a mask. So if they're 6 feet or fewer, I have to be masked. And we had language similar to that in our reopening plan, but it did not state that students who were in a classroom environment had to be masked at all times. And again, we're 6 feet apart. So parents and teachers were inferring that then a student could have their mask off if they were at their desk. And technically that was true. So we actually just updated that guidance or that language today to state that, no, you're expected to have your mask on at all times, whether you're in the classroom environment, 6 feet apart or not. So I just wanted to mention that because that's something I've received a lot of feedback on over the last week or so, and we made the change in our reopening plan.
Yeah, that was the and or dilemma.
Yep.
If you're. What about the teachers? The teachers we really haven't heard their collective voice. The union has to respond to this. I'm sure there's some negotiations. It's a very strange situation, what we're asking the teachers to do. Their health and safety is important. And I had mentioned to you, I think I'd read somewhere that, 60% of New York State teachers are over the age of 55. Yeah. So they're in a higher risk group. And you do worry about that, anything happening to the teachers. And so what's the feedback you're getting from them as far as their response? And you have to meet with them once, right? You have, as the state has said, you're doing your 3 parent meetings, which I think the next one, you have one on Wednesday, right? Wednesday
Correct.
morning.
We have a teacher meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a little concerning to me because I feel like these are things we would be doing anyway. So when it's coming out of the governor's mouth, it somewhat makes it seem like we're not going to check in with our teachers or our parents.
Right.
But we had planned to. So
Yeah.
that being said, we're meeting with our teachers more formally tomorrow. But we had a number of teachers who were part of our reopening task force. As you know, Haldane is a very close-knit school community. I've been in constant communication with our faculty association president, Andrea McHugh, who's a special education teacher at our high school. We were on the phone today. I think we've been on the phone a few times a week since school closed. And again, to continually check in and hear what the concerns are from our teachers, whether it be informally or formally through those means. We're also having our principals. We feel it's necessary at this point for our principals to give each of our teachers a call personally and just check in with them. How are you feeling? What concerns do you have? We don't want to just take for granted that it's happening through all those more formal channels because again, a lot's happening right now in a short period of time. So we feel that through those individual points of connection, we'll be able to again stay attuned to what those concerns are and make accommodations. So I'll give you an example. We had a lot of concerns early on about ventilation, and there still are some concerns about ventilation. It's not, and I don't think that's specific to Haldane as much as schools generally are older buildings. Sometimes there's the HVAC systems are in need of updating. As you know, most schools aren't air conditioned, so there's generally just concerns about the air in buildings come September anyway. But through those conversations, I've been able to become more knowledgeable about ventilation in the schools, stuff that I certainly never didn't really give a lot of attention to previously, and filtering systems and fresh air flow. And then the need to potentially, in older buildings, accommodate the space with certain units to, again, make sure we're operating our buildings in accordance with the guidance that's been provided to us by the Department of Education, by the state agency that oversees buildings and grounds for schools. Because I want to say to our teachers that, look, we've taken every precaution to make sure that our buildings or your classrooms are operating in accordance with what the highest standard is that's been established by the Department of Education for the safe operation of your space. I feel that responsibility to our staff. And my wife's a teacher, my sister's a teacher, so I can empathize. I think to a point. I was a teacher at one point. The health, their health and safety, as well as the health and safety of all of our staff, is important to me. It's something that I take very seriously. The one thing I'd like to note is that while our schools are formally reopening to students in September and to most of our staff in September, we reopened our campus to administrative staff and admin support staff and maintenance and operation in the second phase of New York's reopening. And our cafeteria staff, I'll say, and some of our maintenance and ground staff never left. They've been operating since schools were closed. So I do feel that we've been able to maintain a standard on campus to demonstrate to the employees who have been there. And also the employees who are now getting ready to come on, that we're taking their health and safety seriously, and we're keeping that at the fore, and obviously as well as our kids.
What if this can a teacher opt out like a child might? I mean, if the teacher is really uncomfortable or has kind of underlying, asthma or some kind of thing that puts them at a high risk, Does that come up as far as?
Not formally.
You can't really force somebody to come to work, but there's certainly probably that concern.
Yeah, there's certain rights, and we have a responsibility to make accommodations for teachers who may have a particular condition that would interfere or put them at greater risk by working with students or just coming into a large gathering space each day. So those have to be reviewed on an individual basis. But to this point, we expect, as of today, and it's August 10th, and a lot can change in a few weeks, we expect our staff to all be in, but we may very well have to make accommodations just for certain staff members who have underlying health concerns, and we should. We want to make sure again that they're safe. So that's what I mean. That might be another thing that leads to the school year looking differently. The potential for a teacher to have to be who has a serious health condition to being in a separate location and maybe streaming into the classroom. That would be not something with another teaching assistant or another adult in the room to help with the direct support of students. Those districts are talking about those types of accommodations for teachers who maybe have an underlying condition that interferes with their ability to be directly in front of students each day.
So what happens if, I mean, you must have, I know the state probably required this too, there must be a protocol. You have there's not testing going on, right? I mean, nobody's getting tested at the door. And we know there's a lot of asymptomatic carriers. And so you do think, if somebody's sick, the teacher or a child or something, what is the protocol at that point besides isolating them? But then does the school shut down for 2 weeks? So you wonder if this is going to happen, 3 weeks into the school year, not just at Haldane, but I mean, all over the state. You're seeing this with the colleges, they got 80,000 kids coming back, and you just think that's going to last about 2 weeks. And so you do think of that with the public schools. So how extreme do you have to react if COVID is detected?
So I remind folks who ask this question or similar questions that we were actually in this kind of mode for about a week or two before we closed our schools. This was happening in school districts around in our region. It didn't happen at Haldane, knock on wood, but it was happening down in Yonkers, and it was happening in some of those Westchester schools. And you have to take it very seriously, and you have to have a swift response. And that's where you saw that schools were closing. And that's why I say it very well could be, it's going to be a very unique school year, because I foresee that there may be a period of closure and then there may be another period of reopening. This could be something where we're forced to go into a remote learning environment for a period of time and then have the ability to come out of it. As the governor has indicated, there are the metrics that have been established for the reopening of schools region by region, but that does not mean that there couldn't be a local issue that is influencing a local school and the way it's operating, again, whether it be on site or remotely. So we're in constant communication with the Department of Health. I have a standing Monday phone conference with the Department of Health, with the rest of the superintendents in Putnam County. In addition to that, the role of the district physician obviously becomes crucial. So Dr. Corsaro will be sitting in on our parent forums and also our staff forums that we're having over the next 2 weeks to answer questions like that and to go through what protocol we're going to follow. Every situation, there is a little nuance to each situation. Again, as you mentioned, some individuals are asymptomatic. Some individuals are symptomatic in the building. Well, that will, as I talked to Dr. Corsaro, those could be different circumstances depending on what's playing out. But as you're getting to, Chip, or suggested, it doesn't take much to put the school in a position where the safest thing to do is to just close. And I'd be surprised if at some point that doesn't come up for us this school year in some way. I'd like to think with all of the protocols that we have in place and the mask wearing that's in place, similar to what we've seen throughout our state, that now rate of transmission is very low, that it will be very low, if not non-existent in our buildings, but people get sick. And I think we've learned anything. This virus is resilient. We haven't eliminated it from our communities. While the infection rate remains very low, it's still there. It just speaks to, I think, that we have to be aware that this is going to be a very unique school year.
Although I think New Yorkers should be proud of where we've gotten. I
Absolutely.
mean, we did put the sacrifices in, and people, worked hard to get to this point. And there's never going to be a situation where there's no risk of sending your child or keeping them home or whatever. There's always a risk, right. But I think we've minimized it. And I just find it interesting, the 1% or the 5% numbers that the governor throws out. None of that matters if you have 1% in Haldane, right? I mean, it's really the 1% in your local school that people are concerned about, rather than the region. And because we said at the beginning, every school is so different, but
it is. And we've seen the worst of it. We've had in our community, obviously every community has been impacted by this, but early on, we had a parent who, suffered, we lost due to a COVID-related illness. We've had students who have been sick, other family members who have been sick. We've had some of our staff who've been sick, again, through that period of closure. So So we've seen it. And it's impacted people very differently. We've, everything you read about in the papers, we have seen some whose symptoms are very mild, to those who've obviously symptoms and illness results in the most significant of losses. So we're taking it seriously. We don't have blinders on. We know it can happen here, just like it's happened in other areas. So it speaks again to having those protocols in place. And I can say that though, our district all of our school districts, I believe, are going to be operating very differently because of that. And something I want to mention, Chip, too, is that we're going to be asking families that now as a requirement of coming into school, before you send your child to school, right? The idea is, and the goal is to make sure that you're at a point where sick people aren't coming in. And for someone who's worked in our school or in schools for the greater part of the last 20 years, kids get sick, staff get sick, and it happens. It's part of the nurse's office is a busy place, probably one of the busiest places in the school. So our goal is to make sure parents understand the implications now, though, of a child coming in sick, and that our staff understands the implications of coming in sick. And this is not the year or the environment to tough it out in any way, whether you think it's COVID related or not. If your child is sick, keep them home. If you are sick, stay home. We have to err on the side of caution. So we're going to be asking our families, we haven't released this yet, but to attest that they've screened their kids before they send them to school each day. We will have a procedure in place to flag students who are not screened so that they can be screened upon arrival by one of our nurses. And similarly for staff, we are asking our staff to make sure that they have attested that that they're not coming into the building sick prior to the start of the school day. So, and that will be reviewed by our administrators who they report to each day, again, to assure that as an added layer of assurance that the people who are coming to school each day are healthy.
Except the big challenge to that is the asymptomatic. I mean, that's what's caused the whole pandemic, right? Is that once you have a fever or you're runny nose or you're sick, that's almost easy. Don't come to school, but you just worry about people who aren't showing symptoms, which is again why the mask use is so important. I think that reassures parents. It does for me anyway, but I have older kids who will do it. But you do worry about, if you have younger kids, you just think you want them to understand they can't they can't exchange masks because there's, but whatever, they can't pull it down.
No, you're right.
From their nose.
My
So
son's is
that seems like the huge challenge of it.
It
now,
does,
what about,
but that's where parents can help now too, by making sure with your little ones that you're, especially the students who are at the primary age, kindergarten through first, second, maybe third grade, that when the kids are going out, that they're wearing their mask, they know the appropriate way to wear a mask, that they understand, you don't share, as you mentioned. We're not, giving high fives to our friends in the hallways anymore. So parents can help, prepare their children for the start of the school year by going through these things with them.
It's too bad for the kids that they have to live through. It's messed up. As you know, my daughter graduated this year. It kind of messed up the whole experience for them, and so now even the elementary kids have to adapt, but maybe that's the lesson. You have to adapt.
I think over time,
life doesn't come at you that straight, straight and narrow all the time. So.
Right. Well, for students of history, we know that there's been periods through our history that people have had to, deal with something that's quite significant and really changes what is normal. I think we're in one of those periods now. Our kids are going to look back on this and they're going to be telling their kids about it, and maybe their grandchildren about it at some point down the road. I hope in the end, sharing with our graduates, it reminds me of the Tom Brokaw book, The Greatest Generation, how World War II really defined for many, their generation. And I don't mean to draw a comparison between this pandemic and a world war, but I do think in some ways that there is some opportunity, there's some good that can come out of this when you think about how unprepared we were from a public health perspective. Our kids who are going in now and considering going into some area of public health. I think they'll have this in mind, and hopefully in our kids who are going into government, whatever that may be, and we have a pretty active group of kids who are involved in that on that Haldane, that they'll keep this in mind when they're now in a position of influence and influence the way our, whatever's next for us and how we respond as a society. So you're right. I was upset with the kids that the kids didn't get to have a regular commencement exercise. I think we made the most of it that we could for.
No, I thought it was
students,
great.
right?
We tried to do our best, but it ended up being very well.
It did.
We were able to be outside. Yeah. Well, let me ask you two more quick questions, because there's a lot of questions here, and of course, as a parent, I like getting to go first. I get to ask all my. But what about special needs kids? I mean, are they? Is that something where the kids are coming, the same side kind of situation? The parent can decide to have them come in or do virtual, but it's just a different situation for them.
It is. So I said early on that in our plan, in response, that we want our students with special needs to have the opportunity to come to school every day, K-12, regardless of whether or not we're in a hybrid model or not. Now, K-8, we've created the structure for that to occur. 9-12, there's some nuance to that, but again, I think we can handle that on a case-by-case basis. But our students with special needs, our low income students, our English language learners are at greater risk of falling behind as compared to their peers. And that's something I take quite seriously from an equity perspective. We have to make sure that we're looking out for certain groups of, we have to look out for all of our students, but there's certain groups of students who are going to be disproportionately impacted by, already were by the extended school closure, and will be potentially, depending on what occurs throughout this school year. So, as part of our planning, we're making sure that we're targeting our assistance to those groups, just to make sure we've done it, and we can have a sense of confidence that we're making every accommodation we can for them. But other students with special needs, students with IEPs, will still receive their services. Granted, depending on what a family chooses, they may receive those services through a different mode. And we've done that through the spring, where we had students receiving support services virtually through a speech and language therapist, or through a physical therapist, or an occupational therapist. So we have tried to work through those. We learned some things through the spring as far as what works and what may not, and we still have those same structures of support in place through, or will have them in place in the fall. And you mentioned that spring there was a transitional period. We kind of got thrown into it, but I think by May we definitely had some things set up that we saw as effective, and that we'll continue to have in place now, starting out the school year in September.
Yeah, and so that was kind of my last question before I'll start going through some of these from people viewing. But it really was the virtual learning, and all the technology specialists in this country. I mean, it didn't go. It was an emergency thing when it's thrown in. But you'd think that over the summer, somebody somewhere would have come up with something that, this is how it works, or this could be done. Instead, it seems like the local districts were kind of left to their own. Like you mentioned, we could buy this service, we could stream. We don't. I think that from what I've heard from parents is that was, sort of that disappointment of why can't we have better virtual learning? Not from Haldane necessarily, but everywhere. Like, why didn't somebody come up with something? They had the whole summer,
Sure.
So I think you mentioned, like, you learn some lessons from the spring that hopefully will improve it, but you're also asking teachers to do both, and so they're already going to be stretched thin. It's just kind of a tough situation.
It is. Remember, none of this has any funding behind it. So
right, and
right,
no money. Right, you don't need any money for it.
Yeah, and if anything, we potentially run the risk of losing money. So we've heard the concerns, and I do think I'd like to point us, anyone to the updated reopening plan schedules, because we collected feedback from families back in June, and I do think in our if we have to be in a remote environment again, and I'm talking about all students, I'm putting aside families that may have opted or who are going to opt for that now in the next couple of weeks, that I do think that our program and how we've modified it has been really responsive to the family feedback we collected back in the spring. But to your point, we're always barraged with products and services and solutions for our school. And I always feel I'll respond 90% of them, just to throw a number out there, just are no good. But it doesn't matter when you don't have any funding to pursue any of it anyway. So, we're going to be dipping into the well for whatever we already are, for what we're trying to do to get the schools ready. And we'll only be doing more of that as we go through this school year. So, that's where the discussions at a federal level of stimulus funding coming to the way of New York State and then to the way of our schools really can go a long way towards creating a different infrastructure. The great I guess misnomer of all of this is that I think the byline on the state education guidance document is reinvigorating and reimagining public education in New York State. And I'm all for that, but without any money behind it. And essentially what it outlined was that you're required to do everything you've always done. But on top of it, here's 89 new health and safety assurances. I don't mean to get on my soapbox here.
No, that's fine. There's no money.
It makes it very difficult. Right.
The governments are facing the same thing. You're hearing from the Dutchess County Executive, the Putnam County Executive.
Exactly. We're all in the same boat. It's a credit though to Haldane community, because back in the spring when we put our budget up, and districts were faced with this because of the economy, of being hesitant to go to the tax levy limit, and many districts chose not to. And again, the financial situation of every district is different, but we went to the levy limit because we were anticipating that we were going to have greater needs come September. And that's proven to be, I think, a really good decision on the part of our Board of Education, who sets the parameters for our budgeting. And it's put us in a better position to pursue some things now in these last few weeks as we consider the all remote option for our families. Whereas if we had decided to set the tax rate at 0, that would have been, that much more money that we would have had to not have had available to us, that and we'd be scrapping even more. So
you might still get slammed though, because he was saying, the governor's saying, what, 25% expect, I don't remember the figure, was it 25%, 20% less
state aid,
but do more. We want you to do more.
And there's an equity issue there, Chip, because every district's funded differently. So Haldane, being more of a relatively higher income community, we're not as dependent on state aid as Beacon is. So I'd be curious, I'll listen in when Matt provides his report, because Matt's state aid funding is very different than Haldane. So we only have 10% of our budget that's being driven by state aid, whereas, a district like Beacon or Poughkeepsie or any other more urban environment, they could have upwards of 50% of their school budget through state aid. So, there's a huge equity issue there.
Yeah. What about, I'm reading some of these other things. We've covered a lot of these, but somebody brought up the idea of outdoor space, because you do have this beautiful campus, the former Cragside Estate.
Yep.
And I guess that works till November.
Sure.
But the teachers, you saw that, you saw that whenever I visited campus. Sometimes Dr. Richter had his students out there. And so you'd hope that they'd get them outside, but is that part of the plan or just part of what they've...
So we are currently working with a group of parents to identify, who've been very supportive in helping us re-examine how our outdoor space could be reconfigured or reutilized for teachers, to better enable teachers who want to take their classes outside to facilitate learning out there. So actually tomorrow afternoon, I'll be walking the campus with a couple of our parents and our administrators, just again, re-examining their work on paper and how it may impact flow on campus. And then the next layer of that is to include our teachers in it. That's an area where, I think there's really good opportunity there, right? So if we had a little bit more time, maybe even more money, we'd be able to do some really creative things with whether it be the use of our outdoor space or other outdoor spaces in our community. Because whether it's at Haldane or just in the Hudson Highlands, as you know, there's great outdoor spaces all along the Hudson River or in the Highlands that we could utilize with for our kids and for our teachers. And we know that it's safer to be outside. It's healthier. It's good for everybody, right? To be outside. And so that's something that we definitely incorporated into our planning. Now, we've had some families say, I want my child outside all the time. And that's why I say, realistically, I can't guarantee that your child's going to be outside all the time. We have to leave some room here for our teachers to determine to what extent they want to be outside, depending on what it is that they're teaching in that day or on that day. So we've left that part open to teacher discretion, we fully expect that we'll have our teachers spending more time outside than they had in the past. And then our hope is, as long as we've enabled them to do so readily, we're in a good position. We've also examined the use of alternative space as well, in the area. We haven't committed to anything there yet. And this is the difficulty. Whatever space we utilize, and I'm sure Matt has explored this as well, we have to make sure that it's up to code with New York State building code for schools. So we have some great spaces. They're not schools. And individuals indicate that they would make their space available to us, but then we have to bring that up to code for school use, which could be a significant investment of resources. So we're still pursuing that because we think in the long term, and we're taking a long-term perspective on this. While it's not something we may put in place, we won't have in place for September, October, November. If we want to further spread our kids out, we very well may engage a local agency in utilizing their space if they have it available to.
Somebody asked about dismissal. I imagine dismissal's a lot like arrival. You're going to stagger.
Yeah, and those are the details, Chip. Now that our plans are submitted, we're working through. So we don't have all of the details when it comes. And the good news is we're at that point where we're really talking about the facilitation of a school day now. Whereas, 2 weeks ago, we were still, fully, examining, okay, what are these models that we would be able to move into and what would they require of us. So now we're at a point where we've defined a model where we're thinking through what is the schedule of the day. And, I made some changes already to the calendar by adding another superintendent's conference day at the start of the year for staff training. Again, the more time we give our teachers on the front end of the year, I see, as being the better. We switched the first 2 days of school to half days. So there's a series of things we're going to now have to shift about the actual day to families as we just begin to define, what the day actually looks like.
You seem to have a lot less, you do seem stressed, but you have a lot less stress than the Texas superintendents who are
yeah, I've read some articles.
You read some of those and they're just, where do you begin? I mean, it should be all virtual. Why are we even discussing this? But again, we're kind of in a good place in New York. We have options and we can pivot and we can react, right? And we can react to what happens. But
I'm falling back on, our rate of spread is low. We've done a lot of work in New York to get ourselves to this position. It's not the same as what you read. We're not in the same state as a community. We're not in the same place as a community as some of these other communities that we're reading about in the country. But, I understand why people would be anxious. If you open up the paper on any given day, well, first of all, 2 months you would have read about why schools need to reopen in the fall, but now all you're reading about is, these stories in other states and what's occurring there. And I pay attention to those because there's potentially something to learn. The one last week was the kids in the hallway in Georgia, and nobody's wearing a mask, right? And the hallway's crowded, and there is something to learn there. But I do think that we're in a very different place here because of the efforts of our community over these last few months.
I think the lesson from that Georgia thing was don't suspend the whistleblower.
Right.
That just adds bad publicity to the top of the bad publicity. Right. But, somebody asked, we kind of talked about the finances, but you said, you have to dip in a little bit. A lot of people are asking about contact tracing. Now, I think if that were, so you had somebody at the school who tests positive, that's going to go to the health department.
It does. So we will, and this is part of the gogovernor's new requirements that we have to post our plan for contact tracing on the website, I think by the end of this week or next week. So I was working through that today with the Department of Health. We are not expert contact tracers. We do not have the training that some individuals in the county level have. So we work very closely, when there is a case like that, with the Department of Health. And we're taking their lead in that. But again, it speaks to a change at the school because we're already limiting student movement throughout the day, but we're also going to be limiting the number of individuals who come into the building at any given time. It's not uncommon to have parents coming in, whatever it may be, and we're going to have to limit that this year. Again, it's just a very different year because we don't want to be in a position where somebody who was just visiting the school potentially then comes to be sick, and now we're having to shut down school because of contact that they may have had within it.
Right. Well, is there anything we didn't cover here? I'm hoping I got everybody's so many questions, but I do think we had the same kind of problem even covering this. And Jeff Sims, who's been writing about it, and I have been trying to discuss what, before today, in effect, there's no story in that everybody's just sending in the same plans.
Sure.
Here's the 3 plans, but the governor's not, all he's going to say is you can open. But now the hard work begins for the administrators and the teachers and the parents.
Yes.
To practically figure out how this is going to work, that the risk is reduced, right? Because I think people can't expect that there's no risk. I mean, that's just unrealistic. So you have to just make it as safe as possible, and then have a reaction. If something happens, you react.
Yeah. I agree with you, Chip. I don't think anytime we send our kids to school, we do so, and thinking there's no risk in doing so. There's always, risk, in some way, shape, or form when we send our kids off. And I was speaking to our board last week. I've always had a little bit of anxiety as I've gotten my kids on the bus for the first day of the known and the unknown. And although I do understand that the risks, the perceived risks are different now. And for some families, that's a risk that's too great, and they don't want to send their child to school. And I don't see it as our position, to judge that in any way. I think it's in our position to try to help those families and those kids to the extent that we can. And for other families, they just want their kids back in school. And then there's a whole middle ground there, right? Families who are very tuned.
I think most people are probably in the middle ground. You're uncertain either way. I mean, is this the right thing to do to send them back? Is it the right thing to do to keep them home?
Yep.
And that's fine. I mean, that's everybody's, all you can do is kind of provide the information, and
that's it. And that's
people can
what I see as our role
right
now. Yeah, that's what I see as our role right now, is communicating to a level of detail for our families, having opportunities for them to speak to me, to the other administrators, to our district physician, hopefully to have the ability in some way to actually get a glimpse into what a school day is going to look like. We're thinking about that. How could we, because anxious parents lead to anxious kids, and we don't want our kids coming in with that level of anxiety. So we want to think of how we can support families in getting a glimpse of what the school day is going to look like before the start of the school year. And the same for our staff. We want to make sure that we're taking the time with our staff, because anxious teachers lead to anxious kids.
Right.
Before
lead
the
to
start
anxious
of the school
superintendents.
Yeah. Although I think the skin's gotten pretty thick over the last 6 weeks, if it wasn't thick already.
Yeah. Well, you're a good listener. So let me finish. Let me close this. We've gone a good 45 minutes here. We could always, it'd be interesting. Maybe in 3 months, we'll have you come back.
I'd love to come back.
We'll discuss where we're at and how things have been going. But I know, so everybody's going to do virtual. Like even my sophomore at Haldane is going to do virtual, even though she's going to go in.
So she'll have 2 days a week virtual.
And you'll have some people opting out and wanting to do all virtual. But are there going to be different resources for those people, or for the virtual learning, than there were in the spring now? Do you think there's a better support system in place? Because I know that was a concern for a lot of people. They kind of felt, not just at Haldane, but everybody you talked to was like kind of sent off on the rowboat, figure this out. We got 3 months left. There's other things to worry about.
Yeah, so certainly for our high school students who are going to be in some sort of remote environment, regardless, because they're in the hybrid. I do think that our teachers did a great job reflecting on what worked and what didn't work through last spring, and that we've been able to structure and that they're structuring a level of support for their students that's more reflective of how we ended the school year last year than perhaps how we first started in March in a remote learning environment. So I feel confident there, but there's still work to be done. I think the uniqueness is that they're going to have a group of students in front of them and a group of students who may be at home. And that's different than what they were working through in the spring. So again, we're trying to work closely with our teachers to work through those, what that will look like in these last few weeks, and provide them with the support and training that they'll need to do that well. And then for the families who are choosing the all remote option, that's where I think it could very well look very different. Because I think it's, for example, if you have a kindergartner I think you're choosing an all remote option, and we have our kindergarten teacher with her students at Haldane. I think that's a lot to ask of that kindergarten. It's a lot to ask of any teacher to try to facilitate two groups, but it's very different, again, for 5-year-olds compared to 17 or 18-year-olds. So that's what I'm currently sitting with. And do we have the ability perhaps to have an individual who's exclusively responsible for those students who are learning all remotely or who choose that option? And what is the level of support that we can put in place for our families for that? Because I think by way of putting that support in for our students and our families, that is supporting our classroom teachers, because it's eliminating a responsibility or a dual responsibility that they may have. I'm just not at a point yet where I can define it exactly what it's going to be in the elementary school versus the middle school versus the high school.
They are totally different situations,
yeah.
right? I mean, you have K through 3, and then as opposed to a sophomore in high school. So
exactly.
But
so
you've got 3 weeks. What do you want? You got 3 weeks.
Well, 3 weeks ago, we didn't have our 3 reopening models. So
look at the progress. Look at the progress. Well, I'm sorry. Apologize to the many people we've had here. Thank you for coming. And I hope I have this long list. I think we hit everything. But if not, I will review this so that we can we'll touch base in a few weeks or months, and I'm sure this stuff will come up again. So.
And Chip, just for if any of our families are listening in, we have our family meeting or town hall this Wednesday, and then we'll have 2 more after that at different points in the day. So again, if families are working second shift, we'll have one in the evening, we'll have one in the middle of the afternoon. This week's is in the morning, so we're trying to schedule them at different times. So again, if parents are working, that they can find one that works for them. We record those and we post them publicly. We did a few in the spring, so those will be available. And if at any point a family has a question, they're welcome to reach out to me or any of our building principals, because we want to make sure our families have their questions answered. So many have already, and I'd imagine they'll continue to.
Well, Dr. Benante, how would you, if somebody does want to go to the parent town hall, they just go to the haldaneschool.org?
That's it. Yep, they're posted there, and there's no pre-registration required. We run them as webinars like this. So we have someone like Teresa in the background who's facilitating the chat and feeding me the questions. So it's a good format to connect with families and answer their questions. But if it's anything individual too, folks.
And how will you? So we'll check in with you. The current will be calling you, but should people check the website? It sounds like things are going to change. I mean, you're reevaluating stuff. So most of this is going to get posted. Will be posted.
It'll be posted on the website. There's a COVID-19 tab right at the top. Families or anybody who's interested in looking can click right on that tab, and you'll see my last 5 parent letters, and then you'll see any updates that come out from them. And we also send them through our parent notifications.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Appreciate it. We went much longer than I'm sure that was going to happen, but it's good information. It made me feel better. That's for sure.
No, thank you for the time. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Teresa.
Thank you so much. And we're going to be posting this hopefully tonight. So anyone that didn't attend can access all this great information. And we did leave a lot of questions and answers. So it's good that, you're having more of these Q&As. So that's great. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Teresa. Thanks, Chip. Be well.